Jeffrey Canada, welcome to Explorations in Black Leadership.
Thank you.
I know you were only 2 years old when the Brown decision came down in 1954, but when you became known about it and what it promised, what did you think would happen?
Well, you know, this is really fascinating because I grew up in the South Bronx in New York City, and we saw that issue as having to do with being across the Mason-Dixon line. Now, if you ask, were we totally segregated? Absolutely we were. Did I go to schools that were totally segregated? Absolutely. But in my mind, this had nothing to do with me. This was happening someplace else. And it was a while before I started really becoming aware of how significant this was. It was a piece of history that I heard glimmers of, but I think my grandparents, who had come from North Carolina to Harlem and later to the Bronx to get away from the oppression and to try and find work, we thought we were living the good life. I think later on we began to realize that there were real limits, and this major decision was as critical for me and those of us in the North as it was for those people.
Do you remember how old you were when this dawned on you that this affected us?
Yeah, I was probably 12 or 13. And the first part of my life, like a lot of African Americans at that particular point in time, I wasn't necessarily too thrilled being black, right? Or being Negro, as we called ourselves. I was very brainwashed by the culture I was living in. And we used to tease one another about having big lips and a big nose and dark skin. And I remember I used to constantly argue with my brothers that, no, I'm yellow, I'm not black, right? And they would be this thing. And that was like almost an insult. And that's the culture that I grew up in. I'll tell you what changed it. I was standing on a corner in the South Bronx, and a couple of people from the Nation of Islam, we didn't even know who these guys were, came and they began to talk to us about being brainwashed. And the older guys sort of, they laughed, they just sort of blew them off. But they started saying things like, have you ever thought about why everything bad is black? And they began to say Black Hat, Black Monday. And I sat there and I said, oh my goodness, there may be something to this. And then it feels like the veils were sort of removed from my eyes, and I began to look around, and I said, oh my goodness, what's going on here? And the place that it impacted, I think, in my own consciousness the most was at the schools. I began to look to see what was happening in the schools, and I began to look at a system. I was in sort of the #1 class, and they called it, I was in 4-1 and 5-1, and then the classes went back, and it was all based on what someone thought was your ability. And kids, even in one class behind. So if I was in 6-1, the kids in 6-2, no one thought that those kids would go to college. And they didn't even pretend that they thought. They were hoping they might be able to finish high school. And kids who were in 6-5, no one even thought they could finish high school. And so I sat there and thought, this is not the way other people are living. There are other places in this country, and race seemed to have a primary sort of impact on how people thought about your life expectancy. And suddenly I became very interested in Brown versus Board of Education and what I think it was trying to do, which was not just equalize the, funding and say integration good, but to actually allow African Americans to get an education so that they could improve their lot in life. And that wasn't happening for those of us in the North.
Do you think those kids in 6'2" and 6'3" absorbed this expectation that other people had for them?
It was totally absorbed. I am still, even till this day, absolutely devastated by the generations of young people who believed that they were not going to be successful. So this is, in my family, I'm one of the first ones to go to college. But there were about 4 of us who went to college. I was fine because I was the kind of kid that I was always very gregarious and teachers. The other 3, each one of them were told, my aunt, my brother, and my uncle, each one of them were told that you should not even think about college. And so these were the ones who luckily just sort of somehow fought through that. It doomed almost all those other kids because you internalize, I'm not smart enough. And it made you not want to work hard. It made you not think you could do the work. So you didn't bother studying and you didn't do the homework because you thought, what's the point? Where am I going with this thing? And I think there were generations who were destroyed by that system.
Do you have a sense now, all these many years after Brown in '54, all these many years ago, how it did affect your life, even though initially you thought it didn't touch you at all?
Well, there were some really, I think, important ways that it impacted my life. First of all, I think that it really said that there was something going on in this country that allowed those of us who weren't part of that initial generation of the civil rights movement, that there were some doors that were being opened, and we had better take advantage of it. There was and I think this, by the way, I think this was a generation, I think my generation, so I was born in '52, so right now I'm 56, I'll be 57 in January of 2009. So my generation was the first generation that actually got some benefit from Brown versus Board of Education, but it allowed us to think there's an answer. And you know what the answer is? The answer is education. And you get a good education and you go out and you just open up this thing so everybody else will come charging in behind you. And it really focused me on saying people fought, people died for this. Now I've got to take advantage of this opportunity and try and change what's going on in my community. And I think a lot of us felt that the competition, the absolute pressure on us to prove that we deserved to be sitting next to white students, that we could compete at the same levels, drove a lot of us to actually strive for excellence. And I think there are a group of people, when I look and I see this group that's from my generation, that sort of are in the top places in America. I was in school at the same time Ken Chenault was, and there's just a number of us from that generation that thought, this battle is about getting A's and about showing folk that we are just as intelligent and smart as whites. And that was part of the, I think, culture of our growing up, because it wasn't at that time. It seems, now people think, oh, that's such a racial thing to say. There were actual studies where people were trying to prove the inferiority of races when I was still in college. That there were people who were writing about this. Why, this was really genetics. This was not. So we felt that we were in the vanguard of that struggle. And I think Brown versus Board of Education was the first thing that opened up the doors and allowed us to really get quality educations all over this country.
I remember when I was young, saying that Jackie Robinson broke through with the Dodgers because he was better than all of the other baseball players, and that therefore we black people didn't have to be as good, we had to be better. Was that part of your coming up years?
This was exactly how we felt, that in the end, if you were not better, you were not going to be able to get the same opportunity that someone would say, no, it's not race, we just don't, you just didn't reach that threshold. Right. So we really did grow up believing that. By the way, I think a generation later, that was not the case. I think that people actually began to underachieve because that same pressure wasn't on the next generation, because I think my generation was part of the generation of first. The first one to do this and the first one to do that and the first one to do this. And so we were always sort of breaking through these barriers. And then once the barriers are broken through, everybody says, so what's the big deal, right?
But was that what stopped this breakthrough barrier impulse? That we'd broken that barrier, so therefore, what made it stop?
I think that for a lot of us, we thought that the biggest challenge we were going to face was just getting access. And boy, if you just gave us access, we could just go out and do anything. Now, we understood that because you had to be better, you were going to have to work harder, but you know what? That's the kind of preparation you need for leadership, right? You end up working harder and longer and being more focused and more determined than anyone else. We were doing it because we were trying to prove that we could do it. I think that for a lot of kids, this pressure to be the best, to prove that you can do what other people haven't been able to do, that pressure really lessened. Now, there are lots of reasons. It's not like suddenly after my generation, the schools got better, the inner city suddenly became wonderful, everybody got great jobs. So all of those barriers remained the same, but I think this sense of that we were in a sort of a race to the top, that we had to get there and just tell the world, oh no, we can be a surgeon, or I can be a businessman, or I can be the first woman that runs the law firm. That those kinds of pressures we felt intimately growing up in school, and we felt that it was an obligation to our race to do that. that we had to continually knock these barriers down so you couldn't say we couldn't do this. So no matter what it was. Look, the first time we saw those Williams sisters playing tennis. Oh, there's another barrier. Oh, we got it. Look, we say, oh, they're scared now because we're coming after them in tennis. Next thing we'll have them in ice hockey, right? I mean, it's just like, it was just this sense that we had to say to the world, we can do all of these things at an equal level. And therefore, this issue about whether or not there's some genetic predisposition for any of this stuff, we can throw it out the window. And we thought at that point, we'd be seen just as human beings.
But you know, using the Williams sisters as an example, after them, with, say, Tiger Woods as an exception, we haven't seen the black ice hockey star. Where is he? And why hasn't he shown himself?
Yeah, you know, I think that some of this has to do with where we are growing up. And there are communities, you know, and most of the communities I've been in, ice hockey is not something you would have to go out of your way to find it. So that meant that even if you were talented, you would probably, the chances that one family or two families would end up with a talented young person who could do that, I think are probably rare. I'll tell you this, but I think once you break through, I would bet, and I don't know this for a fact, but I would bet there are 1,000 young African-American tennis players hoping, they're playing right now thinking that maybe I'm the one, right, that I can, but before them, I don't think people felt, it just wasn't our sport. It was like if you put a tennis court there, there was no one to really tell you how the game went and where you're going to get the rackets. So I think that every time we do one of these, we open up the door. I certainly know, and if you play golf, I'm a real hacker at golf because I learned it really late in life, but I loved it. And I know it's had an impact on all kinds of folks, the fact that Tiger Woods was there. But people forget, now, so Tiger Woods is young, not from my generation, from younger. People forget. There were actually discussions about whether or not they were going to let Tiger Woods in certain clubhouses because they were still restricted. I mean, I'm not talking 1800s.
No.
I'm not talking Brown versus Boyd. I'm just talking yesterday. This was still part. So we're still breaking through these doors even today, which is a little sad. But I think that there's, you know what, did he have to be better than everybody else to do it? Yes, he did. Yes, he did. And was he? Yes. And will it allow some other black professionals to just come up? And I think so. I think so.
You mentioned a moment ago having to be better than whites. Being as good as wasn't good enough. Did people tell you that? Did you hear that being said by family or teachers or others? How'd that come to you? Around
the Sunday dinner table, which was a formal dinner in my grandparents' house, right? You had regular dinners, but Sunday was formal. The conversation would come up and it would cross generations. So for my uncles who were 10 years older than me, the message would go out, no, but you know you've got to be better. If you want to just get a break, you've got to be better. You got to be the best. You can't be just better, you got to be the best or they're not going to let you win. We heard it at every level. If you're not the best, they're not going to let you in. And we believed that. So this was coming from, I think, people who loved us, cared for us, but also understood that we didn't know what we were facing, right? We didn't understand that, you know, prejudice and racism really existed because we were so cloistered in many ways by living in these segregated communities that as they began to prepare us to leave those communities, that then we would face this. Now, by the way, so I never faced this until I went to college. Right, because I stayed, my elementary school was all black, middle school all black, high school was all black. So now I go to Bowdoin up in Maine, 90%, 95% white. And then I understood. I was stunned because I was the best. I was the best in my high school, right? So I went up to Maine and said, wait till I go up there, I'm gonna show these people something. Yeah. I was at the bottom. And then I said, wait a second. This separate thing is not working for us because if I'm at the very bottom at a place like Bowdoin, then that means all the other kids who were below me, they don't even have a chance. And what we thought was a good education was not a good education. And again, Brown versus Board of Education came to my mind because this issue of separate but equal, see, there was no one for us to integrate with per se because I think in places like New York City, it was all based on where you lived and geography and, you know, and to some degree, if you got into one of the specialized high schools, you would be mostly, the majority of folks in those schools would mostly be white, but you had to take a test to get in those places, and every other school was a neighborhood school. So we didn't come in contact with this very often, and some kids never came in contact with it if they didn't get out of their community and end up at a school like a Bowdoin or another school that was mostly white.
You mentioned your grandparents' Sunday dinner table. Who else was it that has been significant in your early life? Who in your family and your school teachers in your neighborhood, who touched you?
Well, I have to start with two people. My mother was one. It's funny, my mother always told us the key to this whole thing was reading. She just kept saying, the key to this is reading. And no matter what happens, no, the key to this is reading. You just have to read. And she allowed me to read all kinds of stuff. I was reading adult books when I was still in elementary school, and she didn't care if books had curse words and stuff. She was like, no, the key is reading, right? And I said, oh, let me read that book, right? The key. So this idea that the key was reading. Now, this is another thing. We were very poor. Very poor. And my parents used to tell me stuff, which I hated to hear them say it, right? Because we couldn't afford stuff like haircuts. And so your hair is not cut. It's not, everybody else was laughing and teasing. My mother would say, it's not what's on your head, it's what's in your head. That's what, and I'd be like, I don't want to hear that. Can I just get a haircut? But you know what? Years of those kinds of messages began to really seep in. And it's suddenly I started, saying that to myself. So that was initially, I think, what began to prepare me to work hard. There were a couple of key people in my life separate than this. One was a young man who was growing up in the South Bronx, who himself had dropped out of school. And he just decided he was going to save me. And I don't know why. I don't know why it was me and not any of the other kids, but he just grabbed a hold of me and he said, you are not going to end up like himself. He said, you're going to go to school, you're going to be successful. And everybody looked up to him. His name was Mike. Everybody looked up to him. And he actually stopped me. He wouldn't let me drink. He wouldn't let me smoke, right? Now, it's not in the nice, soft way that people might think the things he told me he would do to me. If he caught me, I couldn't repeat. But the idea was he decided some of us have got to get through this thing. And I've decided you're one of the ones who's going to do that. So you wouldn't see him in any of the formal education. And he wasn't a teacher, but he actually helped me navigate my way through the South Bronx. And then after that, there were a couple of teachers who just decided that they would not accept sloppy work from me. I could write better than the other students, and the teacher would come and he'd be furious at the writing, and it's the best stuff in the class. And I knew it, right? And I was like, so what are you getting on my case for? Why don't you bother Paul? Look at his. And they were like, no, this is not. And they really made me, because I had gotten lazy simply because there was no competition around. They would not allow me to do sloppy work or work that would not sort of stand up outside of the neighborhood I was growing up in. And I think that those kinds of folk really shaped my life.
What about your grandparents and your first grade teacher?
Well, people know that my grandmother is a woman that I loved. She passed away some time ago, but she's probably one of the most unique people that I ever met, because even as a 5-year-old, she would talk to me like a real person. People don't usually see children, and so they don't ask you really important questions. My grandmother would ask me questions like, do you really believe in God? And I would have no, I don't, Grandma, and let me tell you why. And I'd go and I'd explain stuff, and she'd listen to me, and she'd say, well, you know what, let me tell you. And we would have these really deep conversations. Now, if someone came in the room, I would have to stop, and she would stop, right? Because people would have thought, that's not appropriate. Kids don't talk like that. You weren't supposed to speak your mind. But she treated me as if I really had a brain, and it was working, and it was worth listening to, even when she didn't agree with me. And that kind of opportunity really propelled my own, I think, cognitive development, because she allowed me the freedom to speak my mind, to explore boundaries which we were just told, no, because I told you so, that's why it is. And she would say, no, why do you think that? And then she would come back and say, well, this is what I believe. So that really had an impact on me, my grandmother. The biggest impact was, I thought the key to everything was money. We were poor. And if we could just get money, that everything would be okay. And my grandmother was the kind of woman, and if people may know someone like this, you ever hear of the Brinks truck, right? The doors pop open and the bags of money pour on the highway. And some person always takes the bag into the police station, even though no one's around. That's my grandmother. We would sit there and say, you would take it, why would you? Because it's not mine. But if no one could see you, they no, I would never keep something up. And we would sit there and say, but we don't even have any money. You don't have $1. It didn't matter. She told us it's about values. And these values, you don't steal, you don't lie. And she honestly meant that. And her job was to try and save my soul because she knew, I listened to her and I was like, yeah, if I ever got my hands on that money, it'd go right underneath my bed. And she really believed that was wrong. And so it took years. I would love to say that she got to me in a year or two. It took years, and this is the same grandmother who I then, after I really got grown, I was in college, and I was planning my whole life how I was going to pay her back, right? Because I realized what she had done for me and how much time she had spent with me, and she was always available to me. And she got cancer, and it was really painful and bad, and she had a pretty painful death. But she was a real believer in God. I mean, she really believed in the end that she was trying to live by a set of principles that she felt like were Christian principles. And I used to always, this is now, you know, I'm talking, this is 1972, and we had all of these sayings about religion being the opium of the man. I mean, you know, we were really rebelling. They were preachers, and we were, and I remember I went into her because she was a good woman. She lived her whole life, and I always asked her, if God exists, why is it that good people have to suffer, right? And so why is it that the bad people always seem to get the money and have all the fun and the good? And we would have these conversations. I remember going in, and she was on her deathbed, and I said to her, Grandma, you've lived a good life. You've never lied. I said, no, I don't believe that. You've never stolen. You've done everything right by God. And now this, it's painful, it's really terrible. Do you believe? And she said, I believe more now than ever. She said, it never was about believing when things are going great. And I never understood faith until then. And people sometimes say, Jeff, don't you know, how is it you always keep this attitude of thing? But I remember what she told me. Faith is really when things are tough. It's easy to believe when you're getting everything you want. And so she really had an impact on me that lasts till this day.
And what about the first grade teacher?
Well, first grade, I had this wonderful teacher in the first grade who was trying to connect with me because I was a kid who was easily distracted. I had learned sort of the ABCs and stuff like that. And first grade to me was just very boring, and I just wasn't focused. And she kept trying to get me focused in the class, and she tried everything, painting, and I wasn't really into the painting. And she tried poetry. She just got a book, and she started reading this book. And I remember sitting in the back of the classroom, and she was reading about this guy who had these eggs, and the eggs were green. Didn't eat them on a house, and he didn't eat them with a mouse, and he didn't eat them here or there. And I had never heard Dr. Seuss before. And I just remember thinking, well, that is the most amazing thing I've ever heard. It was just amazing to me. And I said, you know, excuse me, could you read that book again? And she read it again to the class. And I just, it was so great. I had to hear it again. She was like, Jeff, we have to move on. She said, take it home and read it at home. So I took it home and had my mother read it. And the next day I came back to school, hand was up first thing, and teacher, could you read? And she said, no, I can't read it. And I was crestfallen. I mean, and she said, well, go in the back and you read it. And I went in the back and I read the book. In the first grade, I had never been taught to read. And people, when I tell the story, people say, well, don't you know what it takes to teach a kid to read? And I said, yeah, when I was at the ed school at Harvard, I taught reading as one of the things that I really took classes in. But I learned to read because this wonderful teacher just kept trying to connect with me until she got to me and just opened up a whole new universe. And when people sometimes say, you know, all children can learn, but they don't really mean it, I know, no, absolutely all children can learn. This is really about whether or not we found the right key to unlock that sort of, I think, great potential that people have inside of them. And this teacher did it and changed my life. And I read, look, by the end of the first grade, I had read every single Dr. Seuss book in the school, everything. And I was absolutely convinced that my life was over, because I went crying to my mother and I said, I'm only in the first grade, I've already read all the great literature in America, and I was just really, and she turned me on to Langston Hughes, County Cullen, and I had poems, and I always had a book of poetry. And I was sort of tough growing up in the South Bronx. It's really tough inner city neighborhood. And I was reading a little Geoffrey Chaucer or something, some Canterbury Tales. I was reading, and it was all because this teacher sort of opened up my eyes to literature and poetry in the first grade.
Tell me about your grandfather. What effect did he have on you?
Well, my father left when we were infants, and so we grew up. My mother was raising 4 boys by herself, and the only man in my life as a role model was my grandfather. And I remember he was a big man who always had a car, which was in the South Bronx, was like a luxury. And I used to think we were rich, and it took me a while to find out that we were poor. Now, he said that the reason his whole career ended was because of John Kennedy. That President Kennedy, during his inauguration, didn't wear a hat. And my grandfather was a hat blocker. And men wore hats, and they had to be blocked, and that's what he did for a living. He made hats, and he blocked hats, and the business fell off a cliff, and he just literally lost his job. And I don't know whether it was really because of President Kennedy or if it was just a change in men's styling, but that's how he always told the story. And he didn't have a more than, I think, a 5th or 6th grade education, so he wasn't going to be able to enter into the labor market. So he did all kinds of things. He sold fruits and vegetables, and he just made sure he always worked for his family, and he taught me how to work. I mean, how to really work. And it didn't matter what we were doing. You had to do it well. You had to deliver quality to people, and you had to have, I think, the tenacity to get the job done. So I got my work ethic from my grandfather. Sometimes pick me up 6 o'clock in the morning. We'd go down to the lower part of Manhattan to get the fish. We'd sell fish all day, cutting them and cleaning them and everything else. And come home that night, I'd get $1. I was thrilled, like a whole $1. And after a while, when I first started working, people would say like, wow, you work long hours, aren't you tired? I said, you should try cutting fish all day on your feet traveling. I mean, that's a tough job. You're smelly, it's, fish all over everywhere. It prepared me at 9, 10. I was used to working all day, and I'd work with him all summer, and I loved it. And I just loved it. And the idea of working for a living was something that I never was without a job, by the way, after I was 10 years old. I always had some kind of job that I was selling newspapers, walking dogs. And I always loved, no matter what the work was, I always loved the idea of working and providing and helping my family with money. So that work ethic, I think I got from my grandfather.
Back to your family, what about your siblings? What influence, if any, did they have on you?
I had 3 brothers, and my oldest brother, Dan, was just the most, he now is a manager in a nuclear facility in South Carolina. But he was one of them, I said, that the teachers told him that he wasn't going to be prepared for college. And I remember how hard academics were for my brother, because they had convinced him that he was not bright, right? They just said, he's really on the dull side. And it wasn't until he went away to college that he found out he was smarter than almost everybody. And so Dan was a nature lover, and he taught me to love nature. In the Bronx, we had chickens. Oh, I don't know how the neighbors stood us. We had a snake, which got away, and an alligator, and he just loved nature, and he always made sure that he's 2 years older than me, that I was involved in nature and those kinds of things. My second brother, John, was just a phenomenal athlete, and he taught me something about talent, which I believe that everybody has potential. But it's not easy for everybody to realize what their talent is, and their talent might be very different. John was an absolutely phenomenal athlete and started playing with the older kids, the 17, 18-year-olds, when he was 9 and 10. I could barely play with the 8, 9-year-olds, and he was playing with kids who were almost grown and was a star. And it was just, he was talented, he worked hard at it, he loved it. He died when I was a sophomore. He was in the Air Force and died, and wasn't war-related. He died of overdose. And he didn't really even use drugs. He took some barbiturates and drank, and he just passed out in his sleep and died. But he did teach me something about talent, and he had it, and I understood that all of us have talents, and you have to really figure out what your talent is.
And the next sibling?
My youngest brother, Ruben, is just an absolute genius with his mind and hands, and can put together anything and take apart anything. And he was the first one to actually teach me anything about math, because we used to learn these mathematical formulas that were totally meaningless, numbers that ran on and on. And Ruben started working in radar and defense. And all of those numbers meant something to them. They were really using, I think, tools which had such specificity that you had to measure things to them. So he brought math alive to me, and I think allowed all of us to understand why I think these subjects really were important, because if you didn't learn them, it cut off these careers for you. And I actually have never had to figure out the third side of a triangle, or how many degrees were in, an obtuse triangle. I've never had to use any of that stuff. He used that stuff every day. And so he could have a career. I had to learn it and then forget it, but he actually used it and helped us understand and appreciate math.
Do you remember, as you were coming along, both before you entered school and after, and as you went away to college, or before even when you were in high school, historical events that had some impact on you? What do you remember from these years?
There were a number of things. I was in the 6th grade when President Kennedy was assassinated. And I remember my teacher just burst out in tears. And this was a time now when, again, this is history is so interesting, when we used to have these drills preparing for the Soviets to drop an atomic bomb on us, where we used to get up underneath the desk. And the idea was that you would get up underneath the desk and you would stay there, and they used to practice this sort of stuff. And so we were always worried that something was going to happen. And when she broke out in tears, we were all thinking, could this be it? And then she explained that the President of the United States had been assassinated. And I remember just being devastated. And we all were. And the enormity of it, because I wasn't, the thing that my parents and grandparents told me about President Kennedy was that he liked us being African Americans, yes. that he really liked us. And I was thinking, this is great. He really likes us. He said, no, he really likes us. Mm-hmm. And so when I found out that he was killed, it really, I think, devastated me. Now, from 6th grade through high school, I lived through one of the most turbulent times, I think, in this country's history, because we had not only the assassinations taking place, so you get Bobby and you get King and you get Malcolm X, all of that happening in the next 8 years or so, but you also had the cities burning in the summertime. We had the long, hot summers where there were riots in the street. I remember by the time Martin Luther King was killed, I remember thinking that we would never, we meaning African Americans, we would never see anything that looked like equality in my lifetime. I don't think I was the only one who felt that way. I felt, after President Kennedy, I was trying to explain to people why President-elect Obama was so powerful for so many of us, because the last person that looked like they were really listening to the cries from the disenfranchised was Bobby Kennedy. And right in front of our eyes, they killed him. And with that, I felt, well, there it goes. That's the end of that. All of this stuff about, we're going to make sure there's equality, that it's equal playing field, and really opportunity, it's all over. They'll murder anybody who says that stuff again. And I just thought this country will never allow African Americans to reach their full potential because it seemed clear now, my age, at that time we thought it was one big conspiracy. There were just a bunch of us. We said, well, they're killing all of the leaders, and if you say certain things in this country, you will be killed, and we just believed that. And then, you know, you look at history and you figure out who, and there's some people who still believe it and some who don't. But it was just among me and my friends, we all believed that if you crossed a certain barrier in this country, you would be killed. And so you could not say certain things, and we thought they were symbols of those kinds of things. So how do you juxtapose that feeling that they'll never allow us our true opportunity with my previous statement that a bunch of us felt it was our duty to smash through these doors. Mm-hmm. So we said, yes, we're going to smash through. How do you
balance those things?
Because we said we're going to smash through every door they'll let us smash through without killing us. Mm-hmm. That was the thing. How far could you go? So we know you never get the president. That one, they'll kill you. Mm-hmm. So leave that one alone. Mm-hmm. But could you maybe run a Fortune 500 company? Maybe. We thought that was getting a little dicey, but maybe. Could you be the president of a university that wasn't all African American? I don't know. But if you were smart enough, maybe. Work for a major law firm, and maybe. So we thought, we didn't know how far. I thought maybe my children, right, could continue to push this, and then maybe we would get something like an African American president or something. But we never thought it would happen for us. So we just thought we've got to open as many of these doors as wide as possible, so that we kind of advanced the cause another couple of steps. And all of that, I think, was from, this was a time, and I don't think anyone's done really good writing about this time. You know, you had the Black Panthers. You had folks actually talking about armed revolution in the country. You had the Nation of Islam. So you had all of this agitation going on where some people saying, let's get guns and take it, and other people saying, no, it has to be nonviolence. And there was this huge debate that involved both African Americans and whites. You know, one of the things no one really understands about the Weather Underground. Bill Ayers is sort of a relic. Oh, I remember that group. And I remember we thought, no, we're not messing with those guys. They're radical and they're out there. So there was all of this debate right now about how we could change America and how far you could go before you crossed this sort of danger threshold. And that really influenced my life very early on. And some of us felt that if we did not push that envelope, we would actually be letting our race down.
Let me take you back a little bit to the time when you realized, and you've said, that there were monsters in the world when a young kid, Malcolm, was shot down. Yeah. Tell us about, what did that do to you?
Yeah. Well, you know, growing up in the South Bronx, we really, you know, we knew we were poor, so that was fine. And we knew it was tough, and that was fine. But we really did not know that there was evil lurking around us. There was a certain innocence about growing up in the inner city. And when they killed Malcolm, this young boy who was really poorer than the rest of us, and it was over nothing. And I remember my youngest brother, Reuben, was there. They were rolling a tire. And we just make games out of anything. We'd find some piece of junk and we'd use it and play with it. And a guy opened up his window and just yelled out the window, hey, you guys, cut out all that noise. And laughed, didn't pay no mind. It took 9, 10. And they kept playing. Guy came downstairs with a handgun and just shot and killed Malcolm. Just right there in the street in front of everybody. And after it happened, you know, if we had been doing something really terrible, right? If we had been breaking people's windows, then you would try and, you could put it into sort of a gestalt that made sense. Oh, you can't go this far. But this just said, boy, something could just happen that could change your life instantly. You have no control over it at all. And we realized that there were monsters. There were people around who looked like regular people, but at certain times, if you got on their bad side or crossed them or ran into them at certain times, you could really see that they were dangerous and they could kill you. And one of the reasons, so this is now, I'm talking maybe 66. There weren't a lot of kids being killed by handguns then. when the handgun issue really became serious in the 80s, and handguns began being pumped into urban centers all over America, the idea that these monsters, see, to me, the monsters were grown men, right? These were grown men these weren't your friends. This wasn't a guy that you met around a corner. When the monsters become a guy you grew up with, who lived around the corner, a guy you saw every day, I think it began to really change the way you think about your life in this country. We knew there were monsters. We thought there was some slight possibility we might run into one of them and they might kill us. And I always thought that I wanted to come back in a community and say, well, there are monsters, but they are heroes, right? There are people who are there to fight, so don't be scared, right? Just don't be scared. We're going to be here. When handguns came out, I began to see this issue of, who's going to protect the kids? And the adults sort of not being in the forefront of protecting kids as a huge problem in poor communities, particularly African-American communities, because it has a real impact on African-American boys. And if you look at the murder rates, and if you look at the incarceration rates, and if you just look at the level of personal violence that happens in so many of these communities, you see the end result of what I was afraid of in like '66. That the monsters would become real.
This is a natural segue. How did you come to choose your career to do what you do now? How did you get from these earlier feelings to where you sit right now?
It's all so personal with me, and most things I do in my life. So I told you about the tracking. So I had these friends, and we were really, this is at a time where a friend, you would say to a friend, watch my back. And what that meant was, if I got into a fight and somebody tried to jump in, would you stay and help fight that person, or would you run? So a person who would run could not be your really good friend, but someone who would watch your back was a good friend. So friendship was a qualitative thing that we could measure by how close you were and how willing this person was to possibly get hurt with you. So I had these good friends. They were terrific. They never had a chance. No one ever thought they were smart. Pretty soon they didn't think they were smart. And I watched these young people end up dying and getting arrested and going to jail while I went on this other trajectory. And I always thought that, and I knew I was going to do this work when I was 11 or 12, because it became very clear to me, one of the things about reading was that I found out the way we lived, a lot of people didn't live that way. There was a whole different world out there that you didn't grow up living with roaches and rats and having to worry about people shooting you and robbing. That was, for some reason, this was in our neighborhood, but if you only went 15 blocks away, people were growing up with a totally different view of what childhood looked like. And I just thought to myself, why did this happen to us? And where are the adults to come in and save us? One of the things this sounds silly now, but one of the things that really depressed me, and it's hard for anything to depress me, I don't get depressed, was when I found out there was no Superman. I used to read comic books, and you read them at that time. We thought Superman was really, and then I remember one of my friends said, there's no Superman. I remember that, oh, there's Superman, there's Superman, he's coming. They said, no, there's really no Superman. And I remember I asked my mother, and she had no idea what I was asking her, because she thought I was asking this mythical, this is a cartoon, real. And I was asking her, isn't there somebody who can come in and save us? And she said, no, Superman's not real. And I thought, there's no one coming? It's just like, they're just going to let us live like this, and this is just how. And I thought, you know what, there ought to be someone coming into these communities and saying to kids, no, I'm here, I'm going to make sure the monsters don't give you, I'm going to make sure you get a good education, I'm going to make sure that this system works for you. And I knew that at 11 or 12, that that's what I was going to do with my life. And if you look at my academic career, you'll see every single course I took was designed to try and help me figure out what I should be doing to help these kids have success in their life.
Well, again, so you chose your education, that I'm going to study this, and I won't study this. I'll study this and this and this, and I'll learn about this, because there's going to come a time when I want to be able to help kids, help children, and these things will prepare me to do that. But could you say then that you had the idea of all this that we see around us today? Was the Children's Zone a notion in your mind then, or has that developed over time?
Well, you know, it was a fantasy, but it was purely fantasy.
Right.
And I never thought that we would ever get an opportunity to do something like this. You have to realize this year we'll spend about $68 million in Harlem. And so over the next couple of years, we'll spend a couple $100 million here. And if you asked me back in '76 when I first began teaching, is anybody ever going to trust you with that kind of money? I was like, are you kidding? They know where I come from. They're never going to trust me to do something like that. So it's part of what I think we're doing different. And one of the interesting things I think about my own role in this work is that I actually decided I'm not going to play along the margins. I'm going to actually try and figure out how to fix this, right? So I want to fix it. So every time you try to fix it, people tell you all the things, the reasons you can't. Well, you got housing, you got health, you have mental health, you got education, you got child care, you got poverty. I mean, and I kept saying, okay, so we have to solve each one of these areas. We have to figure out what we can do, and then we'll be able. And every time you began to try and sort of peel one thing off, there was another thing and another. And after a while, people threw up their hands and said, well, I can't do all of that. I'll do this, but this is all I can do, and I'll do it for this group of kids. And so when we began to say, well, why don't we figure out how to go into a community, and we decided it's going to be 97 blocks, and help all of the children from birth straight through to graduation. Why don't we just figure out what that looks like, and what kind of supports would they need, and what would we have to do with their parents, and how would we build a team to do that? That was a very liberating thought. I never knew where the money was going to come from. I mean, when someone said, well, how are you going to pay for all of this? I never knew where the money was going to come from. But I decided, you know what? I got too old. I said that, I haven't really been honest about what it would take to really, I think, stop this generational poverty. The group of kids that I grew, the same community I grew up in, their people are as desperately behind today as when I was there in the 50s. I go once a year, we have something we call Old Timers Day in the South Bronx, and I go back. And I just say, why? We could fix this. We know how to fix it. It never was everywhere. See, in New York City, it's not everywhere in New York City. The same pockets, the same issues, they've lasted all of this time. And I said, we could figure out how to do this. And so, no, I never thought at the time when I began this work, I wanted to be a teacher, and I wanted to save 20 kids. I said, if I could save 20, and then when I had done that, I said, wow, maybe I could save 2 classrooms. Then I couldn't teach anymore. I said, well, I'll run the school, and then maybe I could save all 200 kids. And he said, well, what if we, and so it started from there, and it really became, as I think I opened up the possibility that it could be more. It sort of made me think about, then what is it that you're really trying to do?
For my own curiosity, when you're going through this list of things you have to fix, the housing, bad housing, the schools not good, health, not only physical health, but mental health.
Mental health.
Was there something you did not think about that later you had to say, boy, we left this out?
Yeah, one of the areas we hadn't thought about in our community was asthma. It was the #1 reason for school absences, and the #1 reasons that young people end up in emergency rooms. And when you looked at school and attendance, so much of it was being driven by asthma that we actually had to create a program. The new one for us today is obesity. It's an epidemic in our community, and we're doing all of this work and spending all of this money, and it's going to create a group of people, if we don't tackle this, which are going to bankrupt the nation, because we're going to have to spend so much money on their health care as they get diabetes and hypertension and just go on and on and on. And so this was a new thing for us. I said, okay, look, we've got to figure out how to do this. But by and large, if you asked me 25 years ago, what do you think the key ingredients of this is to be successful? I could have laid out the same menu. Right? So there was nothing that was sort of revolutionary. We didn't know if handgun violence would be as big an issue. But we knew violence would be, but we didn't know it would be handgun violence. So those, there are this kind of changes that are kind of subtle But basically, it gets back to Brown versus Board. It gets back to education. It gets back to, are we making sure these young people have an education where they can compete, and what's stopping that from happening? And to me, that's what this whole thing is about. And for some poor kids, there are a lot of things stopping that to happen. It's not just whether or not, the schools are equitably funded and whether or not the schools are integrated. You've got all of these other barriers that you have to remove before these young people can get an education. But this is America. We could do it.
And they're all interconnected.
They're absolutely all interconnected. And people keep thinking somehow you can do this one and not have to worry about that one. And I think with the research all says, no, you've got to make sure that you remove these barriers. And by the way, this is the part that I think bothers me. So people come in, they say, oh, you provide health care, we have a health clinic. Mental health, oh, yeah, we have psychiatrists, social workers. You do education, yes, we run our own schools. You do all the social recreation, yeah, we got great recreation, great culture, great arts. And they're like, isn't that great? And I think, no, it is simply average. That's what the average middle-class kid gets in America. There's nothing great about that. Nothing great about that. We haven't figured out some great thing, like we created some new way of educating. No, this goes on all over America. It just doesn't happen in poor communities. And so what we're trying to do is just simply provide for what happens in other places in the country that no one thinks anything particular about. You go into, a nice upper middle class place, that there's health care, services, great school. No one thinks anything about it. The streets look nice. Everybody's like, oh yeah, fine, because I'm in so-and-so. And you say whatever the name is, right? And it means I'm in Scarsdale. Say, oh, of course, what would you expect in Scarsdale? Well, you know what, we should have that for poor children, and no one should think that that's like some great big thing that we're providing for them, because that should be their right as Americans, in my opinion.
Yes, it should be the average.
It just should be average. It just should be average.
Let me read something to you. You said, when I graduated from Bowdoin, I was a different person than when I entered. I knew my vocation would be to work in the poorest communities this country had to offer. It was my calling when I came. It was my calling when I left. But being at Bowdoin was like being plunged into a brave new world. The people had changed me. What do you mean by that?
Well, this is one of the great things I think about education. So I grew up poor. I had never been around even middle class African Americans. So I went to Bowdoin. I found middle and upper middle class whites, and I found middle and upper middle class African Americans, and I had never seen anything like it before. And very quickly, so here's one of the first things. In the South Bronx when we were growing up, we had a certain culture of toughness, right? That was just the way so if we met somebody for the first time, be like, yo, how you doing? And, it was just like everybody had to be cool. You had to be, and so I was meeting these kids, hi, how are you? And I was like, whoa. And I was saying, yo, what's up? How you doing? And no one talked to me for the first 6 months. And I was wondering, so later I asked my friends, I said, look, when I first got there, you guys treated me so bad. They said, you were the most hostile person we had ever met, right? You always acted like you were, but it was just the way we were sort of brought up. And so suddenly I had to confront all of these issues. I had never been around white people before. I just never been around white people before. And so suddenly I'm surrounded and I'm finding out, hey, they're just people. They're just good, bad, they're just people. Didn't know that the thing that really got to me, I met some of the most brilliant African Americans I had ever seen in my entire life. And I looked at them and I said, I want to be, I could barely understand what they were saying, right? These were like seniors and they were talking about dialectism and all that. And I was just sitting there, I never heard these words, what are they? And I just said, I want to be like that. And as a role model, it inspired me to take academics serious and to want to become a scholar. And they sat us down as freshmen and said, all of that's good, whatever happened, but here you've got to be a scholar and you're going to have to take this seriously. And I know if I had gone to another school that had, I think, less rigor to it, I would have been happy to party my 4 years away and pass my classes with C's and thought that that was great. Here there was a bar that everybody said, you have to get to that bar, and everybody around me was trying to do that. And there was no escaping that. And after a while, I just accepted that that was the cultural values of that school, And I became that myself. And then after a while, this was about how many A's you received in your classwork, and not about whether or not you made the varsity basketball team or you were playing football or some of those other things. And that, when I left Bowdoin and came back out, I still understood the streets and I still understood, but I was also a changed person. I was just as comfortable being in the company of educated men and women who had a different set of cultural values than I did growing up.
So you didn't think, as someone might have thought, that the change in you was a loss, that you were losing something, that you had left something behind of yourself. You just added something.
It was that, and you know,
yourself.
the wonderful thing about it was that I've always worked in inner cities and with poor children. And I started out working actually in Boston, and I was working with all white children. They weren't African American, but they were poor, and they felt neglected. They felt everybody were singling them out because they were poor. They didn't feel like they belonged. And I was like, well, I know people feel like that. That just feels like, you know, y'all just white. Y'all don't understand. There's a whole bunch of people feel just like that. And the ability to bring the experiences growing up poor to that group and to be able to connect with them because I understood what that felt like was something I've used my whole life. So I actually thought this was an addition and not a subtraction, that the change allowed me to move from talking with a group of kids in the project, be they black or white, and feeling comfortable walking through that neighborhood, as well as it did going into a boardroom and talking to people about budgets and finance and those kinds of things. And I think that change happened while I was at Bowdoin.
Your decision to go to college in Brunswick, Maine, far away from the South Bronx, very different from the South, could have been put down to chance.
With chance.
What do you think, how much do you think of your life has been chance, luck, something fortunate happening, as opposed to deliberate planning and strategy?
This is the reason that I believe we've got to allow poor children real opportunities. Because without that luck or that chance, my life is over. I'm not graduating college. I'm probably ending up in jail or on drugs or something. That happened to all the rest of the kids who didn't make it out. And I always thought it was unfair. See, in some communities, if you're not lucky, you don't get into Harvard. Right? You say, oh, I can't go to Harvard. I have to go to the state school. So, oh boy, you weren't lucky. In some communities, if you're not lucky, you end up in jail. You end up dead. And part of the challenge, I think, is for us to level the playing field. There were two things that turned out to be just luck. When middle school, I went to junior high school. By my 7th, 8th, and 9th grade. By 9th grade, I was interested in girls. I wasn't interested in studying. I just wasn't focused on it at all. And hormones kicked in, and there it was. And I didn't know how important this time was because you had to test to get into the best high schools in New York City. Right? It was Bronx High School of Science, Stuyvesant, Brooklyn, all of them had tests. So there was test prep and all. I was in a really good class, but I wasn't going to test prep. I wasn't interested in that. And if you didn't get in those schools, then I was going to end up going to Morris High School in the South Bronx. I knew if I went to Morris, it was over for me. I wasn't coming out. This was like a gladiator school. That's what kind of school it was. But you think at 14, I could wrap my brain around how important? No, I could not, right? I'll get to the study, Well, so I take the test, I don't get in. Now, I'm sitting there thinking, oh my God, I'm going to Morris, and so what I better do is get tough. Because forget being smart. You don't make it in Morris if you're smart. You make it in Morris if you're tough. And so now I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I've got to really get tough now because I'm going to Morris. My grandparents moved out to a little town in Long Island, all black, called Wyandanch. Never heard of it before. And out of desperation, I asked if I could come live with them and go to school there. And it was a quiet school with no violence, no drugs. And they said yes. And so there was the second. I got luck for Bowdoin, luck not to go to Morris, and my whole life has changed. And I think that that's one of the shames of this country. that it wasn't whether or not I ever had the potential. It was just whether or not I was trapped in a place where I was not going to have an option to run into quality experiences which would give me an opportunity to reach my own potential. And I think there are millions of young people who are trapped in these kinds of places where unless something lucky happens, they're simply not going to make it out. And I think that that's a shame.
As you look back over your life, when did you begin to think of yourself as a leader?
Well, interestingly enough, it started when I was about maybe 12 or 13, which sounds so strange now, but I'll tell you why. We used to travel around New York City on the trains by ourselves. And when I have grown kids, but my wife and I also have an 11-year-old. And when I think about how much freedom we used to have in New York City at 11. I was able to go blocks, I could get on the train, I could travel anywhere I wanted to go. Well, my mother really showed us how to use public transportation and showed us how in New York City you could get anywhere once you got in the train system. And so we used to just go exploring. We would just get on the train, get off at some stop, me and my brothers, and we would just wander around New York seeing sights. And the other kids on the block, they weren't allowed to even leave the block, much less get on trains. And so we used to do tours. For the kids, we'd take them to the Bronx Zoo, which was to them like going to a different country. But we knew how to take the trains, and it was all so mysterious to them. And I realized that I absolutely loved opening up New York City to other children so that they could get a chance to explore it with us. So this issue of leadership to me, these were younger kids. They were like 2 years younger than me. I think in my professional career, my leadership grew out of the fact that people often ask me about this issue. When I worked at the school, there would be things that would come up that needed to be done, and they would ask, look, will anybody stay to help do so-and-so? And usually people would say, no, I'm not getting paid. And I always thought if you're about the mission, then so I learned how to do all of these different things. And then one day the director of the school said, well, I'm leaving. And, we need somebody in the number 2 position who can do budgets. He might say, well, Jeff, we asked you to do those budgets a couple of times. How do you feel? So, and the next thing I know, I was the number 2, and then the number 1 guy left. And then I had to be all of 27, 28. And they said, well, you have any interest in running the school now? The truth of the matter, I was thrilled to be number 2. And the idea of being number 1 and sort of being the principal of the school was something that I hadn't wanted to do anything else, but there was no one else who really felt like they wanted to do it, and I thought I could do a good job. And then I became the leader. And the thing that helped, I had a wonderful professor from Harvard named John Schlein, who mentored me for the next 2 or 3 years in that leadership role and helped me, I think, develop my own leadership style, which then I think continued over the next few years. So there was this early time when I loved doing it, but even in the later parts of my life, when I became a professional and I ran the school, which was my first professional leadership role, I found that I absolutely loved being able to organize, I think, good people around a mission and trying to help kids. And that's what I really like to do.
But in addition to this early experience in leading your friends in the neighborhood around the subway system of New York City, what about the organization Brothers Through Unity? Oh, you're young then, too.
Yes.
What about that?
Growth Through Unity, I was very young when these African-American guys who were from business. So this had to be, I was in middle school, so this had to be maybe 67. They decided they were going to come back into the hood and help some guys because we were struggling. And it was like these guys came from a different world. They were in shirts and ties, and their shirts were white, and their shoes were gleaming, and they came in and they said, look, we want to help you guys. And my best friend, one of them was his uncle, and he asked me to come, and I kind of thought they were corny. Right? These corny guys, they're coming into the ghetto, they're gonna, oh yeah, this is really cute. But they said we could have a basketball team. And I said, well, does it come with a uniform? And they said, yeah, we'll get you a uniform. And then they had me. So now I'm in it. And they actually tried to teach us leadership skills. And it was amazing because it was years later that I understood these guys were really doing the kind of work that I always hoped to be able to do. The difference I always wanted to, I think, have was they really sounded like they came from a different world. And so when we saw them, we didn't see ourselves in them, right? We saw them as coming from someplace else into our community. We didn't see them as people who came up through our community and therefore were role models for us. And I thought that was one of the things that I always wanted to do. I always let kids know, no, we wanted welfare, we were poor, we had all the same stuff, and that can't stop you. There's no sort of secret thing happening outside that prevents you from becoming something great yourself, which I think is really an important message for young people.
Now, well, how would you describe the difference between your vision, your philosophy, and your style? Or how do these interact with you?
Yeah, well,
vision, philosophy, and style.
You know, the vision, I think I told you, grew over time because I was afraid to really articulate the full vision, which was to go into a place and save all of the kids and do whatever it takes to save them all. I mean, that's the vision we have, and we're in the process of doing that. The philosophy, now my philosophy has really undergone some real changes over time. I grew up in a time when we were trying to figure out whether or not capitalism could work for poor people, right? Would it just destroy people and sort of grind you up and spit you out while certain groups of people got rich? And I was very ambivalent about sort of being in America, which is a capitalist country. And it took me a while before I began to see that there are tools here that are very, very useful in the work that I want to do, that the ability to, I think, motivate people, to bring people together and reward hard work differentially was something that it took me a while to develop. And so if you looked at my early style, which talked a lot about sort of egalitarian, we've got to all pull together, and you deal with me now, which says, you know, people who deliver the most should be paid the most, and I want to make sure that people know how you get rewarded. I think that philosophy has developed over time, and I think matured somewhat. I think people, my style is interesting. I think I have one view of my style, but people who work for me might have another. But let me tell you what I think but my view is that I like to bring a lot of people together to hear ideas. I am never one to pretend I don't have very strong opinions and very strong ideas. But I've learned to be more patient about suspending my own beliefs long enough to really listen hard to what people have to say. And so when we want to do work, I try and get 10 or 12 of the closest people in the leadership roles in the organization together and have a conversation. I don't care, they could be in fiscal or development, it doesn't matter what they're, I just want to hear, what do you think about this issue? What do you think about this problem? And then to try and encourage people to come and solve it. Now, 10 years ago, I felt the need to solve everything myself. Right? So I know what to do. Let's go out and do this and then charge off and come on, everybody, let's go. Now, I don't think that's such a great leadership style anymore. Well, can you get things done? Yes. And if you're really good, well, can you get good things done? I think the answer is yes. But are you teaching anybody anything about sort of how you solve problems, how you deal with complicated issues? No, you're sort of lining people up and saying, I'm in charge, follow me, which I don't think allows leadership to spread in other areas. So as I become older, I've become much more, I think, aware that my style needs to be more collaborative. It needs to allow people to have more of an input. Believe me, if you talk to folks, they say, yeah, that's what he thinks he's doing, but I'm not sure he's really doing that because he is off charging. It is tempered by time, right? That I don't feel like I've got a lot of time to waste. I can't sit around and let people figure this out for the next 5 years, right? So, but we do have time, if it's going to take us a week, a month, to come up with a good. I want people to really, I think, have a chance to grow and develop. But this issue of time, I think, impacts my style because I'm impatient, and I think we can do it, and I think we can do it now. And the only question is, how do we get organized and focused so that we can deliver?
Is the focus on time the difference you described when you began describing your style, saying you would say one thing and people who saw you from the outside would say something different?
Yeah, I think that there's a certain pressure that people feel to deliver that really comes from me. I think that people know that I think that we are going to fix this whole thing, and we're going to do it in another 3 or 5. I think we're close. I think we're about 70% there. I think in the next 3 or 4 years we're going to fix the whole thing. And I am trying to gather folk with this mission that says, come on, we can fix it. Come on, let's think about it. This is just a matter of us not having thought this through hard enough. So I want you all to think harder on this. You have to juxtapose that with me also saying, and could you do it tomorrow? Could you get it done by tomorrow? Because we gotta get this thing going. I think that that's become part of the style, which is, let's all think, but come up with answers so that we can get working on this thing right away.
Is the vision you described just a moment ago, does that guide your work? Does that keep you on a sort of single track?
Yeah, it's easy to get drawn off in lots of different things. And I think that people worry that when we say we have to do everything for kids, they say, well, you can't do everything, right? And so you have to be really strategic about some things, and some things you're simply not going to do. I think that for me, this issue of can we really get this generation of kids in this community to a place where they are going to, I think, reach their full potential. That vision has to stay paramount, and it becomes frustrating in a time like today. And then why? Because we're in the midst of an economic crisis, right? So people say, well, Jeff, have to cut back some, have to be realistic. I know it was a big vision, it was bold, and now, reality is coming in, and we've got to rework this. And I'm not prepared to do that. I think that, and it's not like I'm not going to be realistic and understand that without the resources we can't, but I'm not prepared to back away from the vision and say that this vision now has to become somewhat minimized because these external realities are going to sort of limit who we can reach and how many and the depth of that reaching. And so I think that in the end, if the vision is to fix it, then that has to stay the vision. And even when external things, which are really powerful forces, come into play, you've got to keep focused on your vision. Yeah. I think the vision ought to be the last thing to go, and that ought to go kicking and screaming, right? But people often make it the first thing to go, meaning they come in and they say, hey, Jeff, be realistic. And you say, okay, yeah, you're right. Where are we going to get the money to do this? And okay, let's change that. If it happens, I'll go kicking and screaming. I'll tell everybody, no, we absolutely can do this, and we're going to do it. And I think that we've got to hold on to that vision.
Some people categorize the making of leaders in 3 ways. A, great people cause great events. B, movements make leaders. C, the confluence of unpredictable events creates leaders appropriate for the times. What about you? What was your path to leadership?
Yeah. This is the thing that I think young people who often want, they ask me if I have a couple of hours to mentor them. And what they really want to know is, can you tell me how to get where you are and what the secret sauce is in doing that? And I remind people that I've been here 25 years. That's the first thing. People, and I say, for 15 of those years, nobody knew who I was. That wasn't, there never was a plan that somebody could say, well, how do you get from here to there? That was never the plan. My leadership really was focused around an issue and trying to solve that issue and just staying focused on that issue. And by the way, I never thought that anyone would ever necessarily take any notice of this work, which is part of, when I'm still with some guys I went to school with from Bowdoin, and they work here with me now. And we'll get in the office, we still laugh. Can you imagine? Anybody ever thought anybody would care about this stuff? It's just hard for us to believe. So the first thing I think is that this was all around mission. We saw something that we cared passionately about. And we said that we're going to try and figure out how to solve this. And we were prepared to work on this until we died. And we thought it was important and it was worth doing. And no one thought you were going to make any money. No one thought there was any fame. And by the way, most of us didn't even think the people we were helping were necessarily even going to like us that much. It wasn't like people were going to applaud for you, when you're doing tough stuff. That work, I think, this focus on can we solve this problem is, I think, in the end, how I would describe the leadership. Now, for us to get here, there had to be some opportunistic things that happened that we had to be prepared to take advantage of. That's absolutely true. And so when opportunities presented themselves, we tried to grab those opportunities to sort of leverage our work and move forward with that work. And I think we've been good about doing that. But if I had this program and no one knew anything about the program, and no one knew who I was, and no one even came to look, I would like to think that I would feel no different about this work than I do right now. It never was for any of those other kinds of things. I had a young person who I've known for many, many, I knew when she was a little girl, and she now is a teacher, and she's going for her master's degree, and we had lunch the other day. And I was just looking at her, remembering when she was 11, and her being so scared that she didn't have the right stuff, that she just wasn't going to make it. And she was talking about she was going on a trip to Africa, and she was going with a friend, and they were going to go on safari. And I was just looking at her thinking, this is what I was telling my wife, but my wife knows her also. And we just got the biggest kick out of knowing that, that's the promise of this work. That after a while, no one knows anything about that. She doesn't have to tell that story with her life, but she's having a good life. And, for some number of kids, we've made a difference. So I think that if you're looking, there are some people who want to be leaders, right? And they want to take leadership development because they want to be leaders. And that's a path to leadership that I am somewhat doubtful about. And the reason I'm doubtful about it is that when we bring young people into the organization, they ask about leadership, we say the leader is usually the one who works the hardest, the one who works holidays, the one who works weekends. When we're doing something Christmas, they're the ones who work in Christmas, and they can do that year after year after year. People want to take my job. It's like, oh, I want to be the leader. I want to be in the room, in the office. And say, no. We don't think that's the way leadership. Leaders do what needs to be done, whatever it is. And they do it for as long as it needs to be done. And they can outwork everybody else. And they never lose touch with what the mission is. If the mission is, let's move the chairs and make this place, then that's what we do. And the moment that you think the leader tells everybody else what to do, we think you've lost sort of the essence of the kind of leadership that we're trying to do here. And if you look in my agency, there are people who come up through the agency, and one of the reasons I think we're able to do the work is that the leaders have learned a set of academic and professional skills while at the same time doing that in tough, long, hard service to their community. And I think the two of those things, so they are now the guardians of the gate. So if you want to be a leader, they're like, well, how many weekends did you work? And how many years have you? And I just think that that's a different level of leadership because it's leadership that comes not only from hard work and study, but also from service. And you never forget who the client is. And the client is not you and your leadership skills or your, I think, a celebrity. The client really are those young people or those families or whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish. So I think that's how we see leadership here in the organization.
How does race consciousness affect your work? Do you see yourself as a leader who advances issues of race, issues of society, or both? Are these different? Is there a distinction? Is there such thing as a race transcending leader?
Well, you know, it's interesting. I told you I started my career working with poor white students, and it's probably one of the things that was the most eye-opening for me because I saw those kids as very similar to the kids I grew up with in many ways except for their skin color. And after a while, they actually, because this was in Boston in 1974, 1975, when Boston was going through busing, and these kids were the shock troops for the busing. These were very kids who had been brought up to be violent and racist. That's how they were raised. So they get me walking into their classroom as a teacher, and I tell everybody it's the teacher's equivalent of guess who's coming to dinner, right? I walk in there, those kids are looking at me. I'm like, what's going on here? I have no idea sort of what this deal is. So what it said to me was that part of the problem in America is the issue of our children we have categorized as being about black children. And it's not about black children. It's about all children, but people think it's black children, so they think it's my children. So whenever I go out and try and talk about saving children, they hear me saying, I want to save black children, which means Jeff's children, not American children, which means our children. And I think that that has been a real challenge. Now, I used to take some comfort in the fact that people recognized that black children had a particular set of issues and circumstances which we needed to deal with. You can't be in our work and not look at the plight of African American men and say it is different than any other men in this country, and we need to focus on that. But as a leader, I think part of my challenge has been to get Americans to understand that we are saving American children who happen to be black. And I wouldn't care if children were in Appalachia or in Mississippi or in Seattle. If they're poor and if the deck is stacked against them, I think as Americans we need to change that. And we shouldn't be worried if they're Native American children or if they're poor white children or if they're poor black children, that our job in this business is to really get Americans to think about their children. By the way, here's how complicated this thing is in America. Our new president is considered a black man, right? He's going to be the first black president. So this is what I wonder. So black people are very proud of him, right? Because it's like, yes, we've got a black president and he's ours. But we all know his mother is white, right? So do white people claim that? I mean, do they feel like, well, he's ours too? Or have we so brainwashed America that people reject the fact that he's half black and half white and only see him as black, and therefore they don't feel the same kind of pride in this smart, intelligent person? And I don't care what race he was, I think people would say, wow, isn't he interesting? This guy is really smart and together. But I think that's part of the dilemma around leadership, is that so much of it is colored by race that sometimes people miss the issue. As an African American, do I want to save my children and they are African American? Yes. But if they were all fine, all my kids was fine, would I want to save Latino children? The answer would be yes. And if all of them were fine, would I go to the next group? The answer would be yes. I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting to save African American children if you're African American. But if I just wanted to save them and then I could say to hell with everybody else's children, I think there's something really wrong with that. So it's complicated. I hope to get one day in this country where we just save children and they're equally at risk, not based on race or ethnicity or religion, which I think will make the issue easier. Now, it's not there a lot. There are more poor white children than poor black children, but you would never know it in the way we think about children in this country.
Yeah, there are more poor white people in this country than there are black people, period.
Yes.
Do you have a different style of leadership when you deal with groups that are all black, that are mixed black-white, or all white?
I have something different for each one of those groups. And one of the things I find with all black groups is that we have our own shorthand. and I don't have to explain a lot of what I'm talking about. Sometimes I can say, so y'all know how it is, and they know how it is. And I'm talking about my grandmother, or often I'm talking about, here's an issue that we get into sometimes, corporal punishment, getting spanked. Right? So I talk about how my mother, you know, if we messed up, she spanked us. And my grandmother, she'd give us a whooping, and we knew the difference between the two, because we didn't mess with grandma. And, you know, and I'm talking to a black audience. Almost everybody has somebody they're relating that story to that's in their own family. And so I don't have to spend as much time. I think that in mixed audiences, you tend to have people often get a comfort level if I'm talking about something by looking and seeing how another African American, so that's okay. They're laughing, they're having a good time. I shouldn't be nervous about, because I can be very loose with my conversation and stories. I think that in white audiences, I think you have to spend a little bit more time connecting with them and saying, I'm all right, you're all right. And I want you to know I think you're all right. I don't want you to worry that I don't think you're all right. And so that takes to me a little bit of making sure that there's a connection that happens that's not shorthand, that you're just not jumping to a conclusion that I know who you are, what your experiences have been, or who's in the room.
Is there a danger of further divisiveness if we focus on the concept of black leadership?
Well, that's a great question, and I don't think we have to worry about that danger yet. And it's because I think that there's still some ambivalence, I think, in America about what black leadership really means. If black leadership becomes exclusive, so if Barack Obama, the president, is a black leader, then people are going to be petrified, right? Because everybody's going to think, well, isn't that what they always wanted, black leadership? And now that they've got it, are we cut out of this deal? And I think that there's a fear that somewhere along the line, maybe it's get even time. It's like, we know y'all been mad, so now if y'all get leadership. So I think that there's some degree, people are ambivalent about this, but I don't think that right now, when I talk to people and it's clear that your mission is to create a set of circumstances that levels a playing field, I don't feel like people are really worried about that. I did hear some talk that so many African Americans voted for Obama, right? And it was like, oh yeah, he got more of the African American vote than anyone else, and so it's. But what I've tried to remind people was that early on, when people thought Hillary Clinton was going to win, he was not getting most of the African American vote. People didn't just vote for him because he was African American. As people began to think, well, you know what, this guy is really talented and good, he won people over. And I think people dismissed that and just assume it was because he was African American and everybody decided to vote for him. So I think the country is learning. I think that as people are getting more and more used to African Americans in leadership positions, you know, Colin Powell, I don't think anyone's worried about Colin Powell in a leadership position, right? They believe he's fair. And even when he says what he says, people say, well, I wonder if he said that because he was black. I don't think they then discount his leadership. So if he said, well, I want to go and lead America, so I think people say, yep, that's great, because Colin is terrific. We understand that he's going to be fair because he's been in that position before. So I think we're learning to be comfortable with African Americans who talk about black leadership and African Americans who are leaders who are also black, right? And I think there's a difference that the country is still grappling with, right? Because there's some African Americans, they're just leaders. Ken Chenault's a leader. He happens to be black. He runs American Express. People don't think he's a black leader, right? So that's one issue. Where someone will look at me and they say, now, Jeff's a leader in the black community. He's a black leader. And then I think trying to figure out what that difference is something I think the country is still grappling with. I don't think it's divisive. I don't think it's divisive because I don't think that people have felt that we've wielded unfair power over their lives so that they're excluded. Now, affirmative action was one of those areas that people say, okay, now you're hurting me, so that's going too far, right? But so, and there may be moments like that again, but I think that there was a leadership style in America that I would consider people who are from my generation, which was really looking at the discrimination, the racism, the prejudice, and pointing it out and saying to people, I I demand you look at this that made people very uncomfortable. They say, oh boy, I don't know about Jesse Jackson. I don't know about Al Sharpton. They make me nervous as black leaders. I think there's a different group of leaders that people are saying, well, this is really about issues. And if race happens to be an issue, they'll mention it. But it's not their issue. It's not the issue that they're dealing with. They're dealing with other issues. So I think we're in a sort of a transformative stage right now, and everybody's trying to get used to what this means.
And we don't know how it's going to come out.
I mean, I don't think we know how it's going to come out yet.
Do you think black leaders have an obligation to help other African Americans?
You know what? I really do. And I thought everybody assumed that we were on the same team. I just think of this like football, right? So you're on my team, so we're all trying to score the touchdown. And because you were black, I assumed you were on my team. And I hate to tell you how old I was before I found out not everybody thinks like this. I mean, I was probably in my early 40s, and I was talking to family members, and one of them asked me, why do you do this? I said, well, I do this to help our people. Yeah. They said, why? I said, what do you mean, why? You don't feel any need? They were like, no. And I was stunned. I'm like, you don't feel anything? And I'm like, no, I don't. What? I go out, I work, I do. I said, but you don't feel like you have to. And so then I thought, well, I'm assuming this, and it's not true. But do I believe it's true? The answer to that is yes. That I think that we have a responsibility to level the playing field, to make America a better country. And if you have benefited from being in this country, I think you have an obligation to level the playing field. And if you're African American, I'd like you to start with African American. I don't think you have to be limited there, but I don't think you should ignore the plight of people who are oppressed. Like you're a Native American, I would assume that you would try and help the Native. You're Italian, I wouldn't see anything wrong with that. I would think you'd say, well, look, it's a great country. I want to help my people. You extend it to other people. So that was an assumption I had. It's not a reality, meaning there are a lot of people who don't feel that way, but I thought that's how the game ought to be played.
But if the obligation exists, is there a point where the obligation ends?
Yeah. I think there is a point when the obligation ends, and I think that's when we've really leveled this playing field. And I don't mean that like that's some lofty, 100 years from now kind of issue. I think that there are certain groups in this country that still don't get equal opportunity. And I don't care if you're talking about women, I don't care if you're talking about gays, I don't care if you're talking about Africa, there are these groups. And I think we have to demand that America level this playing field, and we are obligated to keep fighting that fight, in particular if we are from that group, until this playing field is leveled. Look, I don't think we have to go outing people. Right? In the gay community, a lot of times they say, well, I'm not going to let you keep that job and be gay and not say something about it, so we're going to out you. I don't think that's what we have to do. I don't think we have to go and stand in front of Fortune 500 companies and say, what have you done for black people lately? But in quiet conversation, when we have people, I think we have to remind people that we need their help, and their help would be important, and that there's an obligation. Now, they can reject that, but I think that the people need to be reminded that the playing field's not level, because here's one of the challenges. The better you do in this country, the harder it is to understand that others aren't doing as well and why they're not. Right? Because most of us who've done well because we work so damn hard. And you say, well, they worked hard like this, then they would do well too, so what are you bugging me for? And I think that it becomes easy to look at them and say, if y'all would just get up and go to work and do this, it would be fine. You get your kids and your family in that same environment, and then say the same thing, and it's a problem. And I think that people, as you get wealthier and you live in these communities that are more and more exclusive, you forget how hard it is for some families growing up. So to remind people to say, yes, I think that's an obligation you have to do, that's terrific. I don't think it's divisive yet. There's a lot of things I thought wouldn't happen in my lifetime. I would love to think that there's a point before I die that I say, all right, black people, it's over, right? We've done that. Now everybody go do your own American thing, because this is one America. And I do think other countries feel like that. I do think when people consider it their children, I was over in Norway, and they were Norwegian children, and they were concerned about Norwegian children. And when I looked at Norwegian children, they looked like Norwegian children, but people were concerned about that. I'd love to see America get to that same place. And then I don't think this issue of what race and nationality you are is going to be as important.
What do you think is your greatest contribution as an African American leader?
I hope it's going to be that we have proven without a doubt that we can take large numbers of poor, disadvantaged students and get them in and through college and on the path to success. And I want to prove it so convincingly that this won't be a question of whether or not it can be done. It'll only be a question of whether or not we have the will to do it. And if the country then says, you know what, yeah, we could do it, but we don't want to spend the money, fine. Then I'll feel like, well, look, I've done my part. Let somebody else battle this next battle. Right now, people are still saying we don't think this can be done. And I'm hoping to make sure that no one will be able to be comfortable with that, saying, well, there's no real proof you can do this. And so, you know, we don't want to necessarily make these investments because we don't know if we're wasting money and we could probably do a smarter. I want to end that whole conversation and just get it down to, do we care enough or don't we? And let people fight that one out.
Do you see a crisis in leadership in black communities today? And if you do, what contributes to this?
I think there is a crisis, and I think that I'm part of the problem and maybe part of the solution. And this is what I believe, and I learned this the hard way. I mentioned Ken Chenault because we're friends and he runs American Express, and we both took over our organization at about the same time. And I go in occasionally once a year, we go in and talk about running organizations and business. Obviously, American Express is 1,000 times bigger than our organization, but organizations are organizations. There are many similar things. And I was talking to him about leadership, and he said to me, you know, one of the first things my board demanded when I walked in here is that I have a leadership succession planning in place. And I said, really? He said, oh, yeah, they like me. But this was never about personality. This is about how much money you're going to make. And if I'm out of here, they want to know that the company is going to be fine. And so that they've really thought about leadership and how. And I think in our community, many of us who were in leadership positions have not taken this seriously in thinking, how are we preparing the next generation for leadership? How is it that we get out of the way and allow leaders to come up? And one of the things that I'm convinced that I have to do is I just have to leave this position. I can't stay here. So I told my board, I told everybody, look, got another 4 or 5 years. And I have to make space so someone else who's younger can come in. We have to groom them and prepare them so that they can take the organization to the next level, so that we have to intentionally create the next leadership. And then you got to get out the way so people have space to actually develop their leadership skills. And I think part of the problem is that many of us who've gotten to these positions, we fought so hard to get here. And every moment you're here, you're fighting. So you cling to the positions of power until you die, right? And you just protect your kingdom until it's over, and you never think, I should make way for someone else to come in so that we continue to replenish the leadership well with our own organization. You know, like, start your own organization. You know, if you want to be a leader, you create your own thing. Well, yeah, that's great. But some of us who've had, I think, some success at this have to think about what we've learned from from corporate America about leadership and how you bring in the next level. And by the way, it's not always successful. Many companies go out of business. And I think that's poor leadership from the first leader, because they did not protect their company in a way that you could ensure that that company could even get to a lousy leader to allow another leader to come in. So I think we've got to do that all across America. I think my generation has clogged up a lot of the leadership positions, and, you know, we don't want to go anywhere. And that we've got to start making room, and we've got to start sending a message to others that there's an opportunity here for you, that if you're serious and you're committed, that, you know, we don't plan to stay here, and you don't have to go out and start your own thing. There's opportunities for you in existing organizations that are doing great work.
Jeffrey Canada, thank you for being with us.
It is absolutely my pleasure.
Been our pleasure.
Thank you.